Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Peachy and this channel is all about my Sylvanian families collection. In today's video I'm going to be answering all the questions that I get asked about my collection most frequently, and also all those that were submitted to me when I asked if there were any additional questions that people would like answers to. I wanted to start by thanking everyone who submitted questions. There were way more than I expected there to be, so this should be quite a detailed video now. I've noted all of the questions down and I've split them into 4 different areas. So collecting and about my collection in general, buying, scenery, and then the other category at the end for anything that didn't quite fit into those 3. So let's start with the collecting and my collection category, and then we'll go through them in order from there. So the first question that I received in this section was, when did you begin collecting? Which seems like a very sensible question to start with on the topic of collecting. I can't quite remember. It was in my childhood and I must have been about 5 or 6, so around about 1995 maybe. I know it was heavily the Tomy era. All the sets were Tomy era, but I can't remember exactly how old I was, but that feels in the ballpark. And then following on from that, why do I continue to collect? I think for the answer to this one, it's just something I really enjoy. It's a hobby that I love spending my time doing. I like pottering around in my village. I like making setups. I like developing the lore of my village. I like learning more about all the releases that have been over time. It's such a wide stretching toy range. There's just always something new to learn. Just looking at their happy little faces brings me joy. There's still enough being released that I'm interested in that keeps the interest going as well, I think. But it's been a lifelong love, really. My Sylvanians are intricately intertwined with nostalgia of my childhood and growing up, and they've always been there throughout every stage of my life. Whether I was actively collecting at that point or not, they've always been there. They just bring me happiness, comfort, joy, and I can't resist their little faces. They're addictive in that way as well. They're so cute that it's really hard to resist them. So the next question, when did you stop collecting and why? And when did you start collecting again and why? In my very first video on this channel, I think I go through my collecting journey, I guess. And in that video I mentioned, and I think I've mentioned it a couple of times since then, that I had 2 periods where I stopped collecting Sylvanians. The first was at the end of my childhood, and I can't remember exactly what age it was, but at some point I must have felt that I was grown out of them now, too old to keep collecting them, not getting them for birthdays and Christmases anymore, and getting other kind of probably more teenage things. And I feel that's something that's common amongst most children when they're transitioning into those kind of tween and teen years. So I stopped collecting then. It was then around about 2008, 2009. The flare era was in full swing, and I cannot remember what exactly triggered it. I have a feeling it was the really cute adverts that they had on TV at that time. They were kind of stop motion-y, and I just fell back in love with them, like a wave of nostalgia. I fell back in love with them. I had my own money by that point because I think I'd just started my first full-time job, or I was working part-time whilst at college. But either way, I had my own money, and that's when I started adding to my collection again, mostly flare era buildings. And the flare era just had so many good buildings, it kept me enraptured again until around about 2013, 2014, at which point I had run out of space to really add much more to my collection, and I kind of had to taper it off and stop collecting again. At that point in time, I'd finished university and I'd moved out of my parents' house, and my parents were downsizing, so I had to take anything that I wanted and store it in my teeny tiny flat, and that's where it had got to capacity. I still kept everything. I didn't sell anything. I think deep down inside I knew that I would come back to it again when I had the space, and the dream was to eventually have a Sylvanian room where I could have things on display and get everything out of boxes, but that just wasn't feasible. So it wasn't until 2020, I want to say, it was around Christmas 2020, and Sylvanian families were running an ad campaign called Always Your Family, I think, and it was a really nostalgic advert, and it just made me want to get back into collecting again. At that point, I was also well on the way to being in a position to move into a house instead of a flat and get that extra room I'd been looking for. So that's when I started collecting again. And the reason why was I'd moved flat by that point and had a bit more space, and I knew that it wouldn't be that long before I was moving into a house and have a lot more space. So the topic of space leads us on to the next question quite nicely, which is, does your collection sometimes leave you feeling overwhelmed? And yes, the frank answer is yes, sometimes it does leave me feeling overwhelmed. I'm happy with how it's all set up at the moment, but I have run out of room to really add anything new, but there's still new things I want to add. And then I have a kind of internal battle with whether I should add things or not, because I wanted to keep everything contained within the Sylvanian room, but it's starting to spill out. The town series is all in the cupboard in the hall at the moment, and it just feels like it's starting to creep out of where it was supposed to be confined and where I felt kind of in control. Also, the idea of having to put all this stuff away and move it for any reason is overwhelming. But generally, that's a feeling I have when, you know, I'm in a bit of a low moment or tired or things like that. It's not the prevailing feeling that my collection gives me. The prevailing feeling is happiness and joy at what I've been able to accumulate, and the overwhelmed feeling does creep in from time to time, but usually it's manageable. And I think that's probably true of anyone who has a big collection of anything. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, but as long as that's not the prevailing feeling that the collection is causing you, then I think it's normal to feel that sometimes. So next question, what is the best part of being a Sylvanian collector? And for me, this is that the brand is still going, that this is a 40-year-old brand now with 40 years worth of releases, and it's still going. They're still releasing new items. I think it's really nice to be in a position like that with so many toy lines getting discontinued. It's nice that the brand still seems to be thriving, touch wood. It's such a sizable range as well. There's always new things to learn, new patterns to follow for clothes. There's so much scope that you can do with DIY. The scenes that can be created are endless. There's stop motion, there's storytelling, and those are all the best parts of this hobby for me. Next question, do you often play in your Sylvanian village just for fun? And yes, I absolutely do. Depending on how you define play, I wouldn't say I play in the same way that I did when I was a child, but I definitely do what I would call play. I come in here, I move scenes around, I work on stories for the setups that I'm doing, like the big setups that I do on my long table. I'm constantly picking people up off the floor where they've fallen over. That's almost a job in itself, coming in here and making sure everyone's still standing up. I like to move people around quite frequently. I like to adjust how people are posed. But yeah, I definitely don't just come in here to film. I'm also in here pottering, as I say, pottering in the Sylvanian room in much the same way I potter in the garden at other times. Do you let any family members or friends who are children play with your Sylvanians? I don't really know how to answer this one, as I don't have any family or friends who have children at this point in time. I do have friends who have children, but they live so far away and in other countries, so they wouldn't necessarily be here to visit. I feel like I'm really precious with my Sylvanians, and I don't really like to let anyone touch them apart from me. I have a no food and drink rule in the Sylvanian room, but I think as long as people of whatever age are careful and aren't going to break things, then I don't really see why that would be a problem. I let Marble come in here, my cat. She was very well behaved though. What is your collection genre? And the person who asked this question gave some examples of, say, someone who collects only from the Tomy era or the Flair era, or likes to collect all cats or something like that. And I had to have a really hard think about this one, because I don't think I have a genre per se beyond I collect the things that I love. So I will not add things to my collection just because they're from a certain era or because they're a certain type of animal. I only add things to my collection that I absolutely love. So for example, the baby amusement park stuff that's coming out at the moment is not my cup of tea, so I don't really have any of that stuff. However, Flair era shops particularly, I absolutely adore those, so I do have most of those in my collection. So I guess my collection genre, or the thing that would define my collection, is it has to be something I love. How do you keep your collection clean? Now this is a very good question, because how does one ever keep anything clean? For me, the Sylvanian room is a separate room. It's not one that you need to go through to get to any other rooms. So when I'm not in here, I keep the door closed, and that keeps a lot of the dust at bay that just comes from everyday living, because the room is usually shut. I don't leave the door open or anything like that. The windows are always closed in here as well, and the curtains drawn to keep the sunlight out. By that nature, it does not get as dusty in here as it could. And then it's just the usual dusting as and when needed, especially if I'm getting a building out to film it or something. I'll usually give it a dust at that point. The Sylvanians themselves, again, luckily, because of where they're situated, they don't tend to get too dusty, but the flocking does attract dust like a magnet. So if someone's looking particularly dusty, I'll use washi tape, which is like a low adhesive masking tape, to gently, very gently take the dust off. Do you keep all of the boxes? And if not, how do you select which boxes to get rid of? So this is another one which can lead me into the overwhelm that I spoke about earlier. What to do with the boxes is one of the points of contention for me for my collection, because I feel like I should keep all of the boxes because that's what helps preserve the value. However, I do not have space to keep all of the boxes, so I do have to pick and choose. So the first answer is no, I do not keep all of the boxes. And to answer the second question, how do I select what to keep and what to let go, I do it mostly based on the rarity of a set. So if it's, say, the Willow Deer family who've just come out, they're a normal family set and they are part of the everyday range, the box looks like every other family box, then I'll probably get rid of a box like that. However, if we think about the new Stripy Cap Elegant set release, which is a Sylvanian family shop exclusive and comes in a super pretty box with a lovely background, I'm probably more likely to hang on to a box like that because I think it's pretty. That's another determining factor, how pretty I think a box is. So the rarity of the set, so the older it is, the more likely I am to keep the box no matter the condition of that box. And also I'll keep boxes that I personally think are very pretty. I have a space in my garage to keep the boxes, and once that space is full, then I'll need to start going through and probably whittling it down again. But at the moment I've still got space to add some more boxes, luckily, just not every single box. And a follow-on question from that was, do you flatten the boxes? And yes, I do tend to flatten the boxes, especially the boxes for the big houses and buildings. I'll take out any inner packaging and cardboard and then flatten the outer boxes flat and only keep the outer box. I also like to play box Tetris, or box Russian dolls as I like to call it, where I'll take a smaller box and put it in a little bit bigger box, then bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, stacking them together like Russian dolls. So leaving them made up, but progressively putting them in bigger boxes, and that tends to save a bit of space as well without having to flatten the box and lose the inner packaging. Is there a set or outfit you would love to see get released in the future? This is such a fun question, and I was thinking about it a lot, and I've got a few answers because I couldn't whittle it down to just one. So in terms of a set that was prototyped and never came into existence, chickens. I would love to see the Sylvanian chickens that were prototyped back in the Tomy era get a release. And I think I've already gone on a massive rant about how much I love these chickens, so we'll leave that there, so I'll spare you all from having to hear that again if you have seen the other video. I think it was the 40th anniversary wish list. A set I would love to see get released would be a steam train. So having the steam train engine and then maybe a couple of carriages, old-fashioned Victorian Edwardian style train. I would absolutely love that. I think that would be a great addition to the range. We have a tram which is close and I do love the tram, but to have a steam train would be lovely. In terms of outfit, I'm not really sure whether this would come under outfit or set, but I would love to see a collaboration with Animal Crossing. A bit similar to how they did the collaboration with Sanrio and they put the Sylvanians in little Sanrio themed outfits. I would love to see a collaboration with Animal Crossing where they put the Sylvanians in some iconic Animal Crossing themed outfits. I think that would be super cute. If I could re-release any Sylvanian set ever, what would it be and why? Selfishly, I would pick the very, very vintage, I think it was the 1980s watermill. This is a piece that I don't believe got a release outside of Japan, which is a real shame because it's really beautiful. And for me, it's one I'd really, really like, and it's very expensive to buy it secondhand and usually doesn't come with all the pieces. So there's that selfish element to it as well. But also I think it just perfectly sums up the rustic, homey era style Sylvanians from the late 80s, early 90s. And then from a non-selfish standpoint, I would probably pick the Watermill Bakery because I think that's just the perfect Sylvanian building. Just everything about it is so wonderful, and I feel like everybody should have the chance to own that building. And it can be a little tricky to find secondhand with all the pieces these days, so that would be the one I would pick if I wasn't being selfish. Do you want Sylvanian families to release any Victorian sets, buildings or cars? Yes, I would love to see some more Victorian style buildings. We've got a lot of Georgian and then we've got a lot of slightly more modern buildings, but we're kind of missing that Victorian niche a little bit. So I would love a Victorian style house or mansion. I feel like buildings like the Vintage Village store are quite Victorian in the nature that it has all the jars where things would be measured out. But yes, I would love a Victorian mansion, and fingers crossed it will be the one that we saw in the blueprints included with the Biscuit Bear family. Are there any sets you really want but are too expensive? Yes, 2 items come to mind here. First of all, the Momoiro rabbits who have the pink tips on their ears. I just really love the design of these rabbits, but they are way too expensive for me to ever justify buying them. And the other is the White Ermine family. I absolutely, again, love this family. I love the mould and the white fur. They go so nicely with their outfits, but again, they are way too expensive for me to even consider adding those to my collection. Have you ever badly damaged a Sylvanian set or figure? Yes, unfortunately, I have done that. It was in my childhood, so maybe I can be slightly forgiven for my youth. But my mill on the hill, or my old mill, I've had that since my childhood, and the sails are super glued on there because the peg that holds them in place, I broke that as a child, and it has been glued many times since then. It got broken again when I moved flat and then when I moved house. So yes, unfortunately I have badly damaged a Sylvanian building, and it is one of the ones most precious to me from my childhood. I will say though, modern superglue is way better than whatever we were trying to use to fix it when I was a kid, because now it seems, touch wood, pretty sturdy enough that I can spin the sails round, so that's a positive. How did you gain your knowledge of Sylvanian history and the sets that never made it out of Japan? So I think this is just part and parcel of having been collecting for so long. I've been around nearly as long as Sylvanians have been around, and that's depressing to say. But during my childhood, I had the Tomy catalogues to look through. I was there for the Flair era and looking through the catalogues then. I've still got some of those catalogues. I spend a lot of time on shopping sites looking for Sylvanians and what prices they're at and things like that. So I'm just constantly seeing sets and learning sets like that. Now there are a number of resources I use as well. The Sylvanian Families Wiki is a really useful resource. I use that one especially for families and family names. There's also the Sylvanian Fandom Forum. That has lots of good information on it, especially in the era categories. I'm not quite sure how you would call it. There's some topics that are on the Tomy era, the Flair era, etc. And there's loads of catalogue scans in there. So that is a really good resource, the Sylvanian Families Collectors Forum. A newer one that I've been using is sylvanianresources.com. So this is very much an ongoing project. They're adding sets to it all the time, but the information on the sets that are there is excellent. It's got release years and things like that. So that's really, really good resource, and it's only going to get better as they're adding more to it. And then finally, my holy grail is this book. So this is the Sylvanian Family's Exhibition Encyclopedia. It was published in 2019 and it has within its hallowed pages every set that was released in Japan up to 2019 from the start, with release years and names. Doesn't have the boxes, but you know, it's pretty good. This is amazing for finding sets that never made it outside of Japan. And the best part, they've just reissued this, or what I believe to be this, for the 40th anniversary. At the moment, you can only get it at the 40th anniversary exhibition, but there's a number of resellers reselling it. Not for extortionate prices, but I've got one coming on the way to me, so I'll definitely be sure to show you a bit more of that then. But it looks like it's the exact same book, but with the additional 5 years on the back of what's come out between 2019 and 2025. This is my number one go-to resource when I'm researching things. And now the final question in this category, maybe a slightly controversial one. Do you feel the new houses are better or not as good as the older ones? And for me, this is a kind of subjective question depending on what you want out of the houses. The houses that are released these days are stackable, interchangeable. You can build a lot of different configurations with them, so they're quite versatile in that regard. But because of that, I feel they're slightly less realistic looking, and they have lots of holes in the walls and things where that configuration happens. So for me, they don't feel as realistic because of that. Personally, I prefer the older houses. For the more realistic element, they're not as stackable, but for me that's not an issue because I don't want them to be stackable. I want them to look more realistic and feel more like dolls' houses. There's also a question around whether the quality has gone down over time, and I think that's fairly obvious to see. If you look at an old building versus a new building, the quality of the plastic has gone down or changed over time. I mean, I don't know whether it's better for the environment now, and that would be a really good thing if the plastic that they're using is somehow better for the environment than the plastic or manufacturing that they were using. But it feels to me like perhaps cost saving. That's not to say the new houses aren't still good though, because I dropped one on the floor the other day and it was absolutely fine. So they're still pretty durable. They're just perhaps not as much my cup of tea design-wise as the older buildings. So that's all the questions that I got in the collecting section, and that is definitely the biggest section. So now let's go on to buying. The first question I got in this section was, where do I shop for my Sylvanians? Where do I get them from? So that varies depending on the kind of Sylvanian item it is. So let's go through them. So I'm based in the United Kingdom, which is going to have a skew on where I'm buying from probably, because I know there's import fees and things like that, and they vary country to country and depending where you're from. But my main go-to websites are the Sylvanian Family's official online store. That's where I get all the exclusive items that have been released worldwide that I have been patient enough to wait for to get an international release. And Sylvanian Storekeepers is where I generally go for anything else. I love that shop. I think they're a really lovely small business, and I've been shopping with them since I was old enough to buy my own Sylvanians. So they've been there with me for a long, long time now, and they will always be my go-to. If either of those shops don't have what I'm looking for, then Smith's Toys are pretty good, and also The Entertainer. Smith's Toys also tend to have exclusive products. If something's going to be exclusive here in the UK, not an official store exclusive, but something like the Border Collies or the Meerkats, I think in a similar vein to what Barnes & Noble do in the US. And they're kind of the main shops that I will use for things that are current in the range. When we're talking about vintage, it depends what kind of vintage it is. So if it's Flair era or Tomy era, I will most likely use eBay or charity shops. There's also Vinted here in the UK and Facebook Marketplace that I've used a couple of times each, but they're not my favourite. My preference is eBay, just because it feels the most secure in terms of you being protected if something goes wrong. If we're talking about Japan and Japanese releases and Japanese exclusives, that's a slightly different category. So if it's something that is in the standard range, it's just had a release in Japan first, and I can't wait the year and a half a year. It's so changeable that it's going to take to get that worldwide release. So take the biscuit bears that just came out, for example. I couldn't wait for them. They're a standard range product, so I would get them through Amazon Japan. The thing to note with Amazon Japan is the shipping can be a little bit expensive, because here in the UK it's DHL or nothing, and DHL is quite an expensive international shipping source. It comes super quick, but it's just saving up maybe a few products so that you can combine the order together and get the shipping costs a little bit more reasonably. The other website I will use is Kobe Japan. They are another small business, really great shop. The service from them is great. I've bought from them loads of times. They are great for Japanese exclusive products, so either exclusive to an event or exclusive to the online store and shops in Japan. They're my go-to for that, but also vintage items as well, because they get a number of vintage items in at really good prices. They're listing stuff every day. If they don't have something I'm looking for, then I will go to Mercari Japan. So it works in the same way Mercari does in other countries, except I don't think we have Mercari here in the UK anymore, but that's an aside. Mercari Japan is Japanese sellers selling directly, a bit like how eBay works. And usually that's a pretty good place to find vintage items. However, they do not ship directly outside of Japan. So Amazon Japan and Kobe Japan both ship internationally. Mercari Japan does not. So you would need to use a shopping service to do that. And I'll talk more about that under one of the other questions. And the last place that I like to shop for Japanese vintage items is Mandarake, as they also ship internationally. Suragaya, which is another secondhand thrift shop in Japan, a bit like Mandarake, also ship internationally. So they could be an option. However, I haven't used them personally to buy anything, so I couldn't tell you anything about what the service is like, but they do look like they're an option. So the next question that I got in this section is, do I have strict spending limits in place? Do I have an amount of money put aside each month that I know is earmarked for Sylvanians, or do I just do whatever? I wouldn't say that I have a strict spending limit in place, as especially when you're collecting vintage items, you never know what's going to come up when. It's more that I know what my limit would be. I'm making sure that I'm in a place where I can pay all my bills, I can put some money in savings, I can put the money I need towards like DIY or house stuff or holidays or whatever it is, and then what's left over, that's for Sylvanians. And I kind of let that money pool almost in its own section. So some months I'll spend more than others. That's just the nature of releases as well. Some months nothing that I'm interested in releases. Some months lots of things I'm interested in release. Same with vintage stuff. Some months, or you'll go for a couple of months where there's nothing I'm really interested in, or what I am interested in is pretty cheap. And then some months, like I think it was January this year, 3 dream items came up and it was like, oh my goodness. But I knew that I had money saved over from previous months when I hadn't been buying that much. So it kind of levels out that way. So I wouldn't say I have a strict spending limit per month in place, but I do make sure I'm not overspending so much that I can't pay my bills or my mortgage, or getting into tricky situations like that, because I think that's a very important thing that you need to be careful of when you're collecting, is that you're not going so overboard that you're getting yourself into debt. Those things always come first for me, and Sylvanians come second. Following on from this is kind of a follow-up question of, do I feel guilty when I spend a lot of money on Sylvanians? I feel like I'm of the generation where we feel guilty for spending any money on anything that isn't absolutely necessary, because it is getting harder to do things like buy a house or buy groceries or pay the gas, electric, and all of that's going up. So yeah, I do feel some level of guilt when I'm spending money on anything that is kind of frivolous, because let's face it, Sylvanians are frivolous in the terms that I don't need them to survive, but they do make my life more pleasant. And that's how I kind of balance it out. Will I die if I don't have Sylvanians? No. Do they make my life better by having them. Yes, it's a hobby and I find them comforting and enjoyable, so I think it's fine to buy them if that's a hobby that I enjoy, and hobbies are so important for mental health and all of that kind of stuff, well-being, that I think it's fine that this is the hobby that I've chosen to spend my money on. I also know that Sylvanians tend to keep their value, so that offsets the guilt a little bit. Following nicely on from that is a question on how do you determine whether secondhand prices or shipping services are worth the price? So this one is very much down to what you as an individual are willing to spend to get a particular item in your collection. The way I tend to approach the secondhand market is there's an item that I'd like, or a number of items, but let's do it on the basis of one. So say I would like to buy the Japanese exclusive handicraft shop. So I would put that in my various sites. I'd see if Kobe Japan had it or has had it at any point in time and what the price was on there. I'd check on Mandarake and what the prices it sold for or were listed for on there. Suragaya, probably not Amazon because that's more modern stuff. And then I'd also have a look on Mercari and go back through the history and see what it sold for or what the average kind of pricing would be on there. I'd then determine whether I thought it was worth that much money, whether I think that I'd be willing to pay that kind of price for it if it came up again at that kind of price, or whether I'd want to wait and see if I can get one a lot cheaper. Usually the market price is kind of the market price, and sellers are looking at what other sellers are listing things for and listing it for a similar amount. But if you're patient and you keep looking, sometimes people just want to get rid of things, and that's what I'm meaning when I'm talking about finding something secondhand for a really good price. Usually it's someone who just wants it out of their house and they've listed it cheaper than what the kind of going market rate is, and I will pounce on things like that if it's something that I want. I have quite a lot of patience for waiting for someone who just wants this item out of their house. With shipping services, again, it depends how much you want that item. Certain Japanese releases are going to be really difficult to find outside of Japan. They do come up. I know here in the UK, Japanese releases will come up secondhand on eBay sometimes when someone's already imported it, but you've got to weigh up whether that's your better option or whether your better option is getting it at a cheaper price, because usually it's always going to be more expensive outside of the origin country. Whether you think it's better to pay the more expensive price or go for the cheaper price that you could get it for in Japan, and then weigh up the shipping services. If you're buying a few things, or it's a shipping service where they'll hold stuff for you so that you can build up quite a few things and then ship them all together, usually it's not so bad. But again, it's really down to personal preference and how much you are willing to pay for that, how much value that item has to you, in whether or not you want to pay for international shipping for, say, just one item, and whether that feels worth it to you. How do you get spare or replacement stickers for sets? So I think I've mentioned this in a few videos where I've been buying secondhand and maybe the stickers have been damaged or missing that I have printed my own. So that's definitely one option, and the resource I use for that is a forum, the Sylvanian Collectors Forum. They have a whole topic on there which is full of scans of stickers. The community on there is really lovely and really helpful, and often when people get a new set, they'll scan their stickers and upload it into there. So that's a great resource for finding missing stickers. And the other place I've seen them is Sylvanian storekeepers sometimes have secondhand sticker sheets in their vintage and retired section, and also sometimes sticker sheets come up on eBay, but they tend to be a bit more expensive on eBay. So here's a question I get quite often. How do you order Sylvanians from Japan? So Amazon Japan, Mercari Japan, Kobe Japan, Mandarake. So I will quickly take you through each one, starting with Kobe Japan because that's the easiest one. They ship internationally and it works just like any other shop site that you would have online. You put the items in your cart, you go to your cart when you're ready, put in your address, your shipping, select which shipping you want, away you go. The great thing about Kobe Japan is they ship internationally and they have a flat shipping rate, and you can either do express shipping or a slightly slower, slightly cheaper shipping. So they have good options there. You can also buy with or without an account on Kobe Japan. So Mandarake, slightly more complicated, but only marginally. Again, it works just like any other shopping site that you would see. I think you do need an account to purchase on this one. I've not tried to purchase as a guest, I don't think. I've always had an account because you can add things to wish list. Really easy to set up an account just like you would for anything else, so no problems there. The thing to watch on this one is they will list different items from potentially different places. So you're buying directly from the stores and you can also buy from the warehouse. So you'll see under each listing which store or warehouse it's in, and you will pay a shipping fee per store or warehouse. So if you buy something, say from the Nakano store, and then you also want to buy something from the Sapporo store, even if you put them both in your cart together, it will be 2 different packages because they're being packaged in the shop. So that's just something to watch out on. I usually buy things one at a time from there anyway, but if you were wanting to make multiple purchases, just be aware of which shops you're buying them from as to how many packages it's going to end up as. Next, Amazon Japan. I probably should have done this one after Kobe Japan because this one's probably easier to navigate than Mercari. So Amazon Japan works pretty much just like standard Amazon does. You will need a separate account, so you can't use the same account you'd use for your Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk account. You need a specific one for Amazon.jp. You can use the same email address though across both accounts, so that's not a problem. You can shop in English on there and you can change the currency to whatever currency you'd like for your country. It starts in yen, but you can change it so you can see exactly what you're paying. You can search just like you would on normal Amazon, put things in your basket. On this one, I think I might have mentioned it earlier in the video, or I'm filming this all out of order, so I might also mention it later in the video, but the shipping, at least here to the UK, is only DHL, so it is quite expensive. So what I try to do with Amazon is wait and save up a few things so that the overall shipping per item is cheaper than if I was just shipping one item. But this is a really great resource, not just for Sylvanians, but for like Sanrio goods or any other Japanese goods that you might want to buy. I buy most of my remint on there as well. And finally, of the Japanese sites I use most often is Mercari Japan. So Mercari Japan works in exactly the same way as it would in the US or wherever you happen to be, except the UK because we don't have it, but it's kind of like Vinted if you're in the UK. I usually go through the site directly. So I'll go on to Mercari Japan itself, and you do need to search, or it does work better if you search in Japanese characters. So I'll use Google Translate to translate what I want and then copy and paste the Japanese characters into the search bar. If you're using Chrome, then you can use Google Translate on all the pages, but it will come up in Japanese, but you can just translate it into English, and the translations are pretty good these days. You find what you want, and then you come to realize that they don't ship internationally, which is really frustrating. So then you need to find a proxy service to buy through. Unless you have someone with an address in Japan who you can have the stuff sent to and then them send it on to you, you'll need to use a proxy service. I have used 2 proxy services now. One is Japonica, which I'm not going to go into because it's quite complicated and it hurts my head, and I've been using it a few times. It's not the most user-friendly by far. And the other one that I've just tried is Buy, which is the one that is inbuilt with Mercari Japan. So it's the one that they're partnered with. The good thing about Buy is you don't have to wait for them to purchase your item on Mercari. So when I was using Japonica, you essentially send a request through, I would like you to buy this item, here's the money for that. And then you'd have to wait for someone to physically go and buy that item for you. And obviously, if it sold out in the meantime while you were waiting for them to buy it, you'd get your money refunded. But it was always a frustration because for me that would be happening in the middle of the night, and sometimes they'd want to ask questions and things, which delayed it further. But with Buy, because they're the inbuilt partner of Mercari Japan, once you buy it through Buy, that's it, it's bought. You don't have to wait for someone to physically buy it for you. It's done. So that is a bonus. Now, I had a lot of success with Japonica. Once you kind of get your head around it, I was quite wedded to them because their fees were pretty good. Their service was excellent, customer service wise. However, that delay with the buying meant if it was a very rare item or a very good price for an item, 9 times out of 10 it wasn't going to happen. So that's why I wanted to try Buy, because of this instant purchasing. Now, I have only tried it a couple of times. I've tried it once for just one purchase and once for multiple purchases, because they offer a service where you can essentially leave stuff in their warehouse for 30 days. So you could be buying stuff from here, there and everywhere. It gets put in their warehouse for you under your account, and then you can choose to have all those items consolidated together, or some of them, and then ship it out that way. So you've got control as to how much you want to put in each parcel, which I thought was interesting. I placed one order where it was one item off Mercari, it was instantly purchased, and I proceeded just with shipping that item. And then I've just done a second order where I bought 3 different items and have had them consolidated together into one package and then shipped that. So I'm still weighing up the pluses and minuses in my head, but definitely a viable option if you're wanting to use Mercari Japan in probably the most straightforward way, because they are partnered with them. If it would be helpful, I'm happy to do a separate, more in-depth video on how to order Sylvanians from Japan, like taking you through what to do on the websites, the fees and all of that sort of thing. So if that would be helpful, let me know in the comments. And that brings us to the end of the section on buying. So now on to the scenery category, and this is everything to do with the backing scenery and bits and pieces that I use that aren't Sylvanian in my setups. So the most frequent question I get asked here is where I get these apple trees from, or where I got these apple trees from. So they're actually from Amazon, though they look to be a Chinese brand, so I reckon you could probably find them on AliExpress or places like that as well. They come in a pack of 2, so you get one big one and one small one. And they make really good just backing trees for scenes. They're a really good height with the Sylvanians. If I just grab the Persian cat dad here, you can see they're a nice height for being a realistic kind of tree. There's a number of different sellers who stock them. The specific seller that I got them from doesn't seem to have them anymore, but if you just type in miniature apple tree, then they should come up from a number of different sellers. One point to note is that these apples do come off quite easily. So you can have the tree without the apples if you like, and the branches also come off quite easy as well. So you can have the tree like it would be in winter when it's lost all the leaves. Now, I don't know whether that's a design feature or a design flaw, but it's just something to be aware of. If they're going to be around small children, this could present a choking hazard, so just one to watch out for there. From a collector point of view, or an adult collector point of view, it's nice that there's multiple options to have it with the apples, without the branches, or with the branches. Another question I often get asked is what kind of grass do I use in my scenes? And it is actually astroturf. So it comes on a massive roll like this. See there, kind of like how you would get fabric. It has this rubbery texture on the back, and then the front is obviously grass. I've got a smaller offcut here so it's easier to show you. It's 7mm astroturf, and I actually got it on clearance. So unfortunately the seller that I got it from doesn't do it anymore because it was back in 2022. I did go back through my sales history and see if I could find it, but unfortunately they don't do it anymore. But there's plenty of sellers selling a similar product on either eBay or Amazon or other places like that. You could go to a garden centre. You can see here, this is an offcut of the oldest roll I got, and then this is a newer roll, and you can see the colour is slightly different, so that's just something to be wary of. If you're planning to do a big area, you probably want to make sure you're buying enough to do the whole thing, or you might end up with a two-tone grass situation like I've got going on here. It cuts to size really easily just with normal scissors. You don't need any special tools. It does make quite a mess though, so have a dustpan and brush on hand just to sweep up any of the little offcuts that come when you trim it. Some of the little grass comes loose around the edges and it makes quite a mess. Then aside from the apple trees and grass, which are the ones I get asked about the most, I was also asked where do I get other scenery pieces from that I use in the background of scenes. So I've pulled a few pieces together and we'll go through them. My go-tos for this are eBay and hobby shops. So we have one here in the UK called Hobbycraft, but I know in the US there's places like Hobby Lobby and things like that. And that is usually my go-to with eBay as a backup. The fabric I use to make my lakes and rivers and things is just offcuts of actually the curtains that I have in here. So I had to shorten these down to make them fit, and that is an offcut of that. So things you even have laying around the house are good. I also use a towel for my sand. These little picket fences, I love these. These were part of like an Easter bonneting range in Hobbycraft. I think most hobby shops stock something similar to this, especially around Easter. These pom-poms that I use to string on to make buntings. I'm not looking forward to the next time I want to use this bunting because it's all probably horribly tangled, but these were again a Hobbycraft find. The potpourri or kind of eco confetti that I use to make leaves. So these are my autumn leaves and these are my spring blossom leaves. These were from a bridal seller on eBay. They're meant to be used to kind of throw at weddings and they're biodegradable, but I've found they make excellent leaves for scenes. And then tiny Sylvanian sized lights. I use these at Christmas quite a bit. These are a garden centre find, so in the Christmas grotto-y section of local garden centre. The cobblestone plates I have, these are actually Sylvanian brand. They are an exclusive item, so you can find them on the official Sylvanian Families website. At least you can here in the UK. They're double-sided, so this side is cobblestone and this side is wood if you wanted to increase indoor floor space. This is the side I use the most. It looks really nice on high street setups. These are not cheap though, and there's definitely cheaper alternatives out there if you have a look, including just printing off your own paving and just sticking it down, which is what I've done on most of the shelves that aren't grass. I've just printed it out and blue tacked stuff down rather than buying loads of these. The advantage with that as well is that you can cut them to the size you like. For the stones, this is really heavy at 5 kilograms. For the stones, I use mostly aquarium stuff. So this is a larger size and I'll use this to frame kind of lakes and rivers, make stepping stones or paths, nice different colours. And then I also have this teeny tiny gravel size, which I was using on mostly my beach setups or to make like gravel paths. But you can find this kind of stuff by looking in pet shops in the aquarium section or via eBay or something like that. But these tend to work really well, especially the very small. I think these are like 1mm and these are like 1 to 3 centimeters, just to get a variety of rocks. There's of course also the option of DIYing your own scenery bits and bobs furniture. Two channels who are absolutely excellent at that are Lisa's Little Critters. She makes some amazing scenery pieces from just stuff she finds in the Goodwill bins. Incredible the transformations that she does. And also Sylvanian Storytime. She makes loads of awesome set pieces. So this palm tree that I made for my beach scene is actually from one of the tutorials that she's done. And I will link that in the description. And then Sylvanian storekeepers also are a great resource for making bits and bobs. They have lots of tutorials available to download from their website. One of which is this fancy castle, which I made ages and ages ago, so it's looking a little bit rough around the edges now, but still looks pretty effective in photos as long as you don't look too close. And then the blue backing that I use for the sky, this is just poster paper. Comes on a big old roll, and then I just cut it to the sizes that I wanted it and adhered it to the wall. And that was from either Hobbycraft or eBay, I can't quite remember now, but just normal poster paper. So that's what I do for the backing scenery bits. Then there was a kind of follow-on question from that, which was where do I find so many accessories that fit the Sylvanian size well? And really, it's just a case of trial and error. So my go-to place is usually Sylvanian storekeepers as a first stop. They do a brand called Doll's House Boutique, I think it is, and various other Doll's House bits that they've already pre-measured to make sure that they fit with the Sylvanian. So that's always my first stop. If they don't have what I'm looking for, then I'll go to eBay and look at 1/12, 1/16 scale and cross my fingers and hope. Another Doll's House website I like is Doll's House Emporium. They've got tons of bits and they also have some Doll's House Boutique things on there. So that's like where I got these tiny Easter baskets, which I've shoved some pom-poms in to be Easter eggs. Then I've got this whole kind of bag of Halloween adjacent things, and this was all Doll's House Emporium, Doll's House Boutique and eBay. And then in Japan, there's a number of different brands that fit the Sylvanian scale really well. My favourite of these is Rerelease. I've unboxed them a few times on this channel. They have quite a good variety, and I like using that to gap fill things that we don't have in the Sylvanian range, or where I want more of a certain type of thing like cakes or food accessories. Those are particularly detailed from Rerelease. There's also Nyanko, which is a gacha series that I've recently got some of, and that also scales pretty well with the Sylvanians. And then there's lots of random different brands in Japan that scale super well, but it's just a bit of trial and error to find them and to also find someone shipping them outside of Japan. But those are my two main ones that I go to the most. So this little lemonade stand down here, that's Rerelease, and it's scaling really nicely as Freya and Coco are demonstrating for us. And then everything here outside my village store, I think this is all Doll's House Boutique brand from Sylvanian storekeepers, including those little tea and coffee jars in the window. And I think that was all the questions on scenery, so let's move on to the final category, which is the other, where I put everything that didn't quite fit in any of the other categories we've already gone through. So firstly in here there was a question around whether Peachy is my nickname or like a pen name, or whether that is an unusual given name. Peachy is not my real name, it is a nickname. I am from the generation who was told over and over and over again at school, do not give any personal information on the internet. It's dangerous if you do. You shouldn't tell anyone your real name on the internet. And I've kind of had that drummed into me. So I feel like everyone who's around my age has a kind of online handle or online nickname, and I just kind of stuck with that. In terms of how it came to be Peachy, it's derived from Princess Peach from the Mario games actually, because I always play as her. So next question was, how do you get involved with social media, YouTube, Instagram, and that kind of thing? And I'm probably the worst person to ask about this, because I don't really know all that much about how Instagram works, how YouTube works, how the algorithms work to push your content forward or any of that. And to be honest, I'm not really that fussed. I just like making videos for fun, and if they get a ton of views, hooray, but if they don't, they don't. I'm just happy to have the community that we've built here to talk about Sylvanians, because it's kind of I don't want to call it a niche hobby, but it kind of is at my age, so having other people to talk about Sylvanians with is really nice. I think if you're wanting to get into YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is, then just post. It doesn't need to be the most polished, most perfect image or video, whatever it is. Just post, and if it makes you happy, then continue on with it, and if it doesn't make you happy, then maybe it's not quite right for you. I think that's probably the only real advice I've got there. And the final question that I've got in this section was, can I make this a series with a Q&A every few months to follow up from this? And yeah, 100%. If people enjoy this format and there's plenty more questions to be answered, then I'm more than happy to do this again and put another post out in a few months and ask for questions again. The only reason I wouldn't do it again is if we're just answering the same questions over and over and over again, because that's probably going to be quite boring for you guys to watch, and I'll probably go a bit crazy if I'm just having to answer the same questions over and over again. But yeah, if there's more questions that people want to ask, definitely. And that brings me to the end of the list of questions, and also the end of the video. I'd really appreciate feedback in the comments on whether this kind of format was enjoyable, whether this is something you'd like to see more of in the future. I'm conscious it's a bit different to what we usually do on the channel, but I'm hoping it's a good different and a helpful different and not a boring different. At the very least, I had fun answering all the questions. Hopefully they've been helpful for you in either getting your question answered or telling you something you didn't know, or just generally helpful information. If I didn't answer your question, it wasn't on purpose. I think I got everything down, but if I've missed something, I'm so sorry. Just let me know and I'll add it to the list for the potential next video, or I'll answer it in the comments if it's a bit more pressing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye for now.